My name is Nora Caldwell, and I was 32 years old when I learned how much a simple manila folder could change a family forever. My grandmother turned 79 on a Saturday in October. She had spent the entire day baking her own birthday cake, vanilla with buttercream roses, a recipe she had been making since long before I was born. She set the table for 8 people, laid out her favorite plates, pressed paper napkins into neat squares, and arranged dried flowers she had picked from her own garden. Nobody came. My parents were skiing in Aspen. My brother Aaron sent a text at 4:15 in the afternoon that said, "Happy birthday, Gran. Skiing is amazing." My father sent nothing at all. My mother posted a photograph of her ski goggles to her church group chat with the word "blessed" written underneath it. I had driven 3 hours from my apartment in Hartford, leaving straight after my shift ended, still wearing my work shoes, with a bunch of gas station flowers sitting on the passenger seat. I pulled into her driveway at 8:12 in the evening. The porch light was on and every other window was dark. When I walked into the kitchen, I saw exactly what had happened. 8 places were set at the table. The flowers she had arranged that morning stood in the center. The birthday cake was there with 79 written in pink, but the candles had melted down into small waxy puddles in the frosting. A large carton of ice cream had softened and spread across the tablecloth in a pale pool. My grandmother was sitting in her chair in her purple sweater, holding a glass of water. She looked up at me and smiled and then looked uncertain. She asked if it was Tuesday. I told her it was Saturday, her birthday. She touched the edge of the cake and said she thought she had been making it for the church sale. I put the gas station flowers in a jar, made her a plate, and we ate the cake with our hands because neither of us wanted to wash forks. I sang happy birthday twice because she asked me to start over halfway through the first time. At 10 o'clock, I helped her bed. She felt very light, as though there was less of her than there used to be. As I tucked her in, she reached up and caught my hand, and for a moment her eyes went completely clear, the way a radio sounds when it finally finds the right frequency. She whispered that they thought she didn't notice. Then she was asleep before she could say anything more. I should explain who I am in this family. The Caldwells are comfortable people in Connecticut. My father, Gregory, spent his working years in insurance and now mostly plays golf. My mother, Diane, organized charity events and managed a social calendar. My brother, Aaron, ran a construction company and drove a car that cost more than I made in an entire year. Then there was me. I worked as a legal assistant specializing in estate documents and elder law, the kind of work that involves reading the fine print very carefully. I studied for my law exams at night. My family treated my job like a quiet hobby, something I did to fill the time, nothing worth discussing at dinner. I didn't argue with them about it. I just kept reading the small print. But I had always loved my grandmother's house more than any other place. I took my first steps there. She taught me how to read important documents on the porch when I was 19, sitting beside me with a cup of tea and a patience that nobody else in the family seemed to have. She helped me secure my first apartment when my parents refused to co-sign anything. That house was where I had always felt like myself. That night, I stayed in the guest room. Around midnight, I got up for water and noticed a business card on the hallway shelf. It belonged to a real estate agent, and on the back someone had written in pencil that the house was valued at $680,000 and could be moved quickly. On Sunday morning, while my grandmother napped, I cleaned the kitchen. I put the cake away and threw out the melted candles and washed her good plates and stacked them back in the cupboard. I stood there looking at them and wondering whether they would just sit there until someone came to empty the house. At 10:15, there was a knock at the front door. A woman and a man stood on the porch. The woman introduced herself as Ruth Adler and told me she was a lawyer my grandmother had hired 14 months earlier. The man was her assistant. Ruth handed me a thick sealed folder with my grandmother's signature written clearly across the seal. She said my grandmother had asked her to deliver it personally when the time was right. I asked what she meant by the right time. Ruth looked past me to where my grandmother was sleeping in her chair, and then she told me to come to her office when I was ready and not to discuss anything with my parents in the meantime. As their car backed out of the driveway, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. She had seen them from somewhere and wanted to know who was at the door, and she told me not to sign anything. I turned the phone face down on the table and looked at the folder. My grandmother's signature across the seal was strong and steady and deliberate. This was not the work of a confused old woman. This was the work of someone who had planned carefully and trusted the right person to carry it forward. I opened it. Inside were a trust document, a power of attorney, a letter from her physician dated 14 months earlier, and a handwritten note addressed to me. The note said, "Nora, when they come to the house, open this. Everything you need is here. I love you. I'm sorry it has to be you." She had known. She had understood that her memory was beginning to slip, and she had understood, with absolute clarity, what certain members of her family would do the moment they felt they could. She had gone quietly to a lawyer and built a wall around her home before anyone realized what she was doing. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. On Monday, I didn't go to work. I found a realtor's lockbox hidden in the bushes beside the front steps. In the mailbox was a printed listing showing the house for sale at $680,000. In the kitchen drawer, I found a cash offer from a purchasing company. The person listed as the seller's representative was not my grandmother. It was Erin. I sat down on the kitchen floor with the papers spread around me. The sale was scheduled to close in 3 weeks. That evening I called my mother. She was warm and cheerful at first, telling me about the skiing. When I mentioned the lockbox, the warmth drained out of her voice and was replaced by something measured and careful. She said they were simply helping Gran because the house was too much for her to manage. She said they had been handling things for months, and I shouldn't concern myself with the details. I asked whether Gran knew what was happening. My mother said Gran knew what she needed to know. Then she admitted that Erin's company was facing serious financial problems, and that the proceeds from the house would cover a care facility for Gran and help Erin stabilize things at the same time. I told her it was Gran's house. My mother's voice went cold. She said Gran had dementia and was not in a position to be making decisions about a property worth that much money. Then she said Gran wouldn't even remember the house by Christmas. I told her it was a good thing I would remember, and I hung up. The next morning I went to Ruth Adler's office. Ruth explained that 14 months earlier my grandmother had come to her frightened. She knew her memory was becoming unreliable, and she knew exactly what that would mean for her home once my father and mother felt justified in stepping in. She chose me as her protector because I was the only person in the family who understood the paperwork and the only one she trusted completely. Ruth walked me through what Gran had done. She had placed the house into a trust before her condition worsened significantly. The house no longer belonged to her as an individual. It belonged to the trust. Gran had been the trustee, meaning she controlled all decisions, but she had named me as a successor trustee to take over if she became incapacitated. Not my father, not Erin, me. Ruth also showed me the physician's letter from 14 months earlier, confirming that my grandmother had been fully competent when she signed the trust documents. She told me that any papers Erin had obtained her signature on recently, while her mind was compromised, would almost certainly be unenforceable. I went back to the house. Gran was in her armchair. She had a clear moment, and she knew I had been to see Ruth. She told me that strangers had been walking through her house on Tuesdays. She said Erin had brought her some papers to sign, but she couldn't remember what they said. I told her it didn't matter, because she had already taken care of everything a long time ago. She looked at me and said she was not gone yet. I told her I knew. When Erin arrived 2 days later, he came in as though the house already belonged to him. He stopped smiling when I told him I knew about the sale. He told me bluntly that his company needed over $700,000 within 8 weeks or he would lose everything, and that selling the house was a solution that worked for everyone. I told him Gran didn't want this. He told me the house was essentially already sold. That night I found the papers he had brought her in September, a new power of attorney signed just days after she had been hospitalized for confusion. Her signature on those pages was shaky and uneven, nothing like the strong, clear signature on the folder Ruth had given me. I photographed everything and sent it to Ruth. On Friday, Ruth came to the kitchen table, and we went through all of it together. The trust was valid. The September power of attorney had almost certainly been signed when my grandmother lacked the legal capacity to understand what she was agreeing to. The sale could not proceed. We made a plan. We would not go to court yet. We would simply appear at the closing meeting with the real documents, and let the paperwork speak for itself. Before that, I called a state agency that investigates elder financial abuse and reported everything. The person I spoke with told me that someone had already filed an anonymous complaint about my grandmother's situation 6 weeks earlier. Someone else had been watching and had known something was wrong. My father came to the house a few days later. He stood in the kitchen and talked about remembering his mother singing there when he was a boy. He said he didn't want to sell the house, but Aaron was in serious trouble, and Diane said it was the only path forward. I told him he had the power to stop it. His phone rang. It was my mother. He answered it and left without saying goodbye to Gran or to me. The phone calls from extended family began shortly after. Aunts and family friends told me I was being selfish, that I was trying to take control of something that wasn't my business, that my poor mother was beside herself. My mother had told them that I was the one manipulating Gran, using my access to her home and her trust to seize the property for myself. It was a precise reversal of the truth, and it was told convincingly. I didn't argue with any of them. I knew the documents would say everything that needed to be said. One aunt, Aunt June, called and told me quietly that she believed me, that she had suspected for some time that Gran had gone to a lawyer to protect herself, and that she was glad someone was standing up for her. The closing meeting was scheduled for November 15th. I arrived with Ruth and her assistant. My parents were there, and Aaron and the real estate agent and the buyer and the attorney facilitating the transaction. Everyone was settled and ready, and there were smiles around the table. Ruth stood, opened her folder, and laid the trust documents on the table. She explained clearly that the house was trust property, that my grandmother had established the arrangement 14 months earlier while fully competent, and that I was the only person with legal authority to authorize a sale. She placed a physician's confirmation beside it. Then she placed the medical records showing Gran's state of mind when Aaron's power of attorney had been signed. The woman running the meeting looked at the documents carefully and then said she could not proceed with the sale. The room went silent. Then my mother's voice rose. She said I had no authority, that my father was grandson, and that made him the rightful decision-maker. Aaron said he was going to lose everything, and that I was destroying the family. I told them quietly that they had tried to sell an old woman's home while she was sitting alone at her own birthday table with melted candles in her cake, and that I wasn't the one who had destroyed anything. The buyer stood, gathered his things, and left. The real estate agent followed. Ruth informed my parents and Aaron that the state agency had opened an investigation into the handling of my grandmother's affairs. My mother told me I would regret this. I picked up my folder and walked out. I drove back to the house. Gran was asleep in her chair. I tucked a blanket around her and told her the house was safe. She opened her eyes for just a moment and asked me whether I had kept the kitchen table. I laughed and told her I had. She smiled and went back to sleep. After that November meeting, things moved in the direction that reality tends to move when the truth finally becomes visible. Aaron's company failed. He sold his car and found work that matched what he could actually afford to lose. My parents relocated to a smaller place. My father sent me an email several months later saying he was sorry. I read it and didn't respond. Some apologies arrived too late to change anything. I moved into the guest room and have been there since. It was not what I had imagined for my life at 32, but it was the right thing, and I have never once questioned it. In the spring, I baked a cake on a Tuesday for no reason at all. We sat at the old kitchen table with the sun coming through the window and ate it together. My grandmother's memory continues to fade. There are days when she doesn't know my name and days when she reaches for my hand and holds it like she knows exactly who I am and why I stayed. She is safe. She is loved. She is in the house where she belongs. A person doesn't stop mattering because their memory is unreliable. And sometimes the quietest person in a family, the one everyone overlooks, the one working the night shift and studying for exams and reading the fine print, is the one who ends up keeping watch when it matters most. All it took was one folder, carefully prepared by a woman who trusted me before I even knew she needed to, and enough love to drive 3 hours on a Saturday night with gas station flowers on the seat beside me.